So, we all are excited about our keynote interview this afternoon. John Love, never been here before, never been in a real estate forum before. Chief Executive Officer, KingSett Capital, and Nurit Altman, Director, RBC Capital Markets Real Estate Group, will discuss thought leadership and the value in building relationships in the real estate market. Many of you are familiar with John's background. We can all agree that the opportunity for someone to create and build a major successful organization comes usually once in a lifetime, like for everybody. But in his 40-year career, John has accomplished this feat twice. In his 9-year tenure as head of Oxford Properties Group, John grew the company from the depths of the 1992 real estate recession into a national leader that was sold to OMERS in 2001. John then founded the following year what has evolved into Canada's leading private equity real estate investment business. Thank you to John for joining us today and for Nurit for guiding us through the conversation. Please join me in welcoming them both up on the stage.
Well, good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for being
Big
here
crowd.
with us today. I'm very honored to be here with you. I wanted to start our conversation going a little bit into your history and specifically focusing on cycles. You've seen a few in your career, from your early days in Alberta to doing business through the late 80s and early 90s. So maybe you can tell us, what do you see in today's cycle, and how did those experiences of the previous cycles help to inform the business decisions you're making?
Cycles. So, you often hear the phrase, what inning are we in the game? And of course, I don't look at it as a game. And a cycle, the cycles are all relatively repetitive because they all start with the same three things. One is accelerating growth. Second is accelerating inflation. And the third is rising interest rates. Because ultimately what happens is it's very difficult for a central bank to pick exactly the amount of monetary contraction that will cool an economy without overcooling it. It's like being in a Holiday Inn and trying to adjust the shower, right? It's very hard to get that right, turn on the knob and not too hot and too cold. Or at least so I've been told. So anyway, so I would say today, when people say, like, where are we in the cycle and it's 10 years and long in the tooth and everything else, I don't really think that's relevant. Because I don't think the preconditions exist today, although that can change quickly. I don't think the preconditions exist today that lead to a sharp tightening, which ultimately causes the cycle to come down. So in the absence of some unwanted and difficult government intervention, i.e., which you've seen in Alberta, but unlike that kind of a strategy, this cycle's got some legs on it. And ultimately, there will be a cooling down because it will overheat. And you'll see that with labor issues first, inflation second, and then rising interest rates that will ultimately overreact. And you'll have lots of time to think about it.
And do you look at cycles differently for different asset classes? We're talking a lot about development today. Is the land cycle different than that for income producing?
So I would tell you that, a period ago, and because I've been around a very long time, I could pick any time, long time ago, I would have said that, a classic risk diversification was a 2x2 spreadsheet, and you had, different cities on the left, and you had different asset classes going along the top. And that was, in fact, a conventional model of portfolio construction. I would say as I've evolved and learned that I would take off the different asset classes, then I'd look at the cities and make your bets accordingly. I mean, if you look at Toronto as an example, Vancouver's the same, where the markets are very strong. They're very strong in every asset class. Everything works. Office is tight, residential's tight, retail's good, Royal York's good, just a pitch. So it all works through the system. And so I think that it's less relevant as to what you pick versus where it is.
So can I ask you about your call on land prices? In that context, maybe you can talk about Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver.
Yeah, no, I actually think those are three distinct stories. In Toronto, I think land is an attractive investment. The movement away from the LPAC, is a good thing, because I think that's going to liberate some of the planning regime, which is a blocker. But I think land will continue to be in demand, because the fact is we haven't got enough office under construction, we don't have enough res under construction, et cetera. So ultimately, land has to have value. Montreal, I think you're seeing a really interesting dynamics with a more emerging market. And in Vancouver's a little tricky, because you've got a really, really hostile municipal overlay. And you've got to very skillfully navigate that system. And if you're not careful, you'll get caught in the trap. So, the land game in Vancouver would be in Canada. It's got a great opportunity, but it's the trickiest to navigate.
So when we caught up before the session, one thing that you said to me is that you think that this cycle will be slightly different, as you alluded to earlier. And I think, in my mind, one of the biggest differences that we're seeing today is the way that technology is impacting our business. From ride sharing and autonomous vehicles, changing the way we think about parking lots, or e-commerce and its effect on retail and industrial. So how are you at KingSett thinking about technology in the context of your business? Is it an opportunity, or do you see it as a big challenge?
I think it's an opportunity. I think we just have to have perspective. What we're doing is we're investing in a number of things. We have something with the Fifth Wall guys, and we're in some funds in the US and stuff like that. And that's really kind of dabbling to get, if you will, an audit of the market, see what's going on. But one has to be particularly careful to make sure that whatever technology you're looking at solves a problem that somebody actually has. So, and as an example, we looked at this one technology which was terrific at gathering this certain type of data. But then we went to the people that would use that data to make a decision, and they said that wouldn't actually change how they make their decision. So it is more nuanced, going to take more time. I mean, I think in the customer-facing range, we're going to see more innovation in multi-res, I think. And we are, at our 2 St. Thomas project, the Bluetooth technology, the remote-enabled parcel delivery systems and stuff like that is the duplex plug, wiring in the building. I mean, there's a lot of things in there that wouldn't have been in there perhaps 5 years ago, and none of this is particularly brain surgery. But there was a much greater focus on what can we do. As I look at office space, typically office space is a box, and you can put in that box anything you want. And so it really is incumbent upon the tenant to put most of the things in that box, because most of us have done things with, upgrading elevators and a lot of those things. But I think the use that technology drives, co-working is an example. Co-working, we used to think co-working was sort of something you put in space you couldn't lease to anyone else. And our thinking's evolved on that now, saying that co-working is the new amenity. Because a lot of the co-working customers are your other tenants who want that in the building. So, they can be Fortune 500s, but they have a specific project team that needs the extra flex space. So they look at it like flex space. And in that way, it makes your base offering better. That's why we have them in Scotia Plaza, for example. I think autonomous vehicles is going to be really interesting when that becomes commonplace. And that's either going to be in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, I don't know. But most of us agree it will happen. And there's going to be some parking space available. Anyway, so, like that gig will be quite interesting. So, we are going to see the evolution of changes. And I think as owners and operators, our obligation is to try and stay as informed as we can, not chase the last shiny ball, but make sure we can validate whatever we're doing with either an internal user or a customer.
You just moved into new space. Is there any sort of gap that you saw, hey, I have this problem?
It's a lot more space than we had before. I would say that, in our space, and we're in Scotia Plaza, we took a couple floors and did our thing. I think there's nothing there particularly that is any different technology than someone would have done 10 years ago. Now, the lights are on motion sensors, so they go on and off. There's a number of things like that, but there's no, I would say there's no big bang.
I want to talk about planning policy because we are here at the Land and Development Conference, and I think you have some views on this topic. If anyone follows John on LinkedIn, they might have read a few of them. So I want to ask you well, I know that you're doing development across the country. I want to ask you nationwide, but start with, if you were the chief planner of Toronto, what are the top policy changes that you would look to make?
So, I sort of think back to, our issue is affordability in the broader context. And affordability at its root is, if you've got a lack of affordability, it's because you have a lack of choice. And a lack of choice always creates inefficient markets where weaker offerings get peak pricing like stronger offering. So, and you end up with all sorts of dislocations, with people being able to, in a relative sense, abuse their tenants with impunity. So that's all a bad set of facts. So the only thing you can do about that is to have more supply. And this isn't a complicated scenario. Regrettably, the system's been slow to respond from my perspective, because there's actually two views. One view is that the private market should be the supplier of new supply, and the other is that the government should be the supplier of new supply. And the government, no matter what it tries to do, will be unable to meet this demand. And when we think of these numbers in this context, 120,000 people move to the GTA a year. So that's 10,000 a month. In Aura, the project we did with Canderel, it's 80 stories, took 7 years from start to finish, 1,000 apartments, 2,000 people. That's only 1 week's supply addition for Toronto. So it just shows you how daunting this task is. So in response to supply, I would do 4 things. In the short term, I would permit second dwellings in houses, second kitchens in houses, because I would try to unleash all the housing where people would be happy to have a renter in the basement. And immediately that makes affordable for 2 people, the person in the basement as well as the homeowner. So that would be one, and that could be done very quickly. We should all buy Home Depot stock before that gets announced. Second thing I would do is I would take the rail lines to Hamilton, Barrie, Oshawa, et cetera, and I would dramatically increase their frequency, because you'd like to make those regional centers a very viable commuting option for those who want a single-family home. In the longer term, there's 2 strategies. One is that I think you have to pre-zone with realistic numbers, all the major boulevards. So you've got things like the Danforth Avenue, which has, depending where you are, a 2 or 4 times coverage. Well, you buy that, and then you have to go through the planning system, and it's 2-3 years, et cetera, et cetera. If we just said, look, except where there's a subway stop, just make it all, let's say, 8 to 10 stories, 6 to 12 stories, whatever, and just did that on Danforth, Queen, King, Spadina, Bathurst, et cetera, et cetera. Then buyers and sellers of properties could know exactly what they're doing, and then you go for a building permit, not a zoning application. And I think that would free up a significant amount of medium density residential, which is much more amenable to family living. And then the last piece in the single-family home is we fundamentally have to redefine what a single-family home is. And there was a time where it was a 50-foot wide lot, or maybe it'd be 100 deep or 120 deep or whatever it is. We have to permit that subdivision into 20 and 25-foot lots, where you can build new homes. And, it's 20 feet wide and 80 feet deep, and they can be very serviceable home. Our son and daughter-in-law live in a home like that in Midtown Toronto, and it's a lovely house. So but because we've got to find more space for people, or we got to shut the door.
Do you have any examples of municipalities in this country that are doing it well?
No. Well, what tends to happen is there's a direct correlation with the demand side, and there's the inverse relationship between supply and demand. In other words, if you go to Calgary right now, where demand is quiet, supply is off the hook. And if you go to Vancouver, where demand is off the hook, supply is muted. Well, that's an imperfect set of facts. And it is markets where planners, when the planners find there's no lineup at the door, all of a sudden planning's a little easier.
Right.
And here, in Vancouver, you've got a lineup at the door. So people are saying, well, we need more affordable. Then you have in Montreal the mayor saying we're going to go the 20-20-20, which is 20% affordable, 20% three-bedroom, and 20% whatever the other one was, medium price or something. Anyway, but if you that's 60% of your building, you got nothing left to make any money on. So it just halts all the system. And meanwhile, and I'm sure many of you get these almost daily, or sometimes twice and three times daily, news releases from the feds saying that an important announcement is in Timiskaming and Fort Nelson and Prince George and communities. I have to look at what province they're in, but and that's not where the problem is. So I mean, it is supply, and I think if there's a message, and I think we're starting to see some recognition of this, but the whole concept of the only way we can address affordability and the only way we can house growth is we have to have more housing, and because supply ultimately is choice, and with choice, people have options, and they price those options, and the people providing those options fix them up, they price them properly, good things happen.
So the topic of our discussion is thought leadership, which we've done a little of, but also relationship building. And I know that you attribute a lot of your success to the relationships that you built early in your career and have been able to maintain throughout your career. So maybe you can tell us how you've been able to do that so successfully. The relationships, I think, are the currency around which a successful business career is built. And if you think about what it takes to build a relationship, and whether it's a personal or a business, it doesn't make any difference. It's the same core elements: respect, integrity, transparency, humility, and these are core values that you can put on a wall or a coffee mug. But at the end of the day, if one can live that strategy, it makes a big difference. I had the advantage of being my first 5 years I was a stockbroker. And at the age of 11, I was out there and pitching my wares to people. And, I learned a great deal about how to act as a young person with typically everybody who's older than me, right? In trying to sell stocks and bonds. I'd go see a guy and give him my pitch. He said, well, I've got kids older than you. And I say, what's their name? But anyway, always more prospects. So it's learning, I think that value, that deep value sense is something that I feel very strongly about, and I leadership takes values, because people don't want to follow people where they don't personally have an alignment with the values, and I think relationships in business, people fundamentally want to do business with other people who they think will treat them fairly, honestly, transparently. They kind of know what they're going to get, and don't have to get the last nickel off every deal, and so on and so forth. So it is, I've been blessed with good people to work with. We focus very hard on how we conduct ourselves, and we're hopeful in most circumstances that's a good thing. So how do you balance things like ambition and a desire to win with those relationships and doing the right thing?
Because I can tell you 100%, you won't win long term without them. So it's really about what your length of vision is, because it's always easy to scrape something this afternoon, but that's going to come back and bite you later. And I would tell you, I'm on the Business Council of Canada. It's 150 of the largest CEOs. And if you were to ask me what's the one common factor amongst all those CEOs, these are big businesses. I'm sort of like a little business in that group. So, and I would tell you that the common factor is values, and because these guys are grounded, and they've all got the same value set. And I feel very strongly that if you play for the long term, values will always win. If you play for the short term, you can do whatever you want, but that won't last here. I've often said to Americans, and they say, well, oh yeah, I know a developer from Canada. And I said, well, I know how you can tell a developer from Canada. Now there'll be some of these in this room, so this is a joke. But it's because they screwed somebody in Canada. That's why they're in the US. But because the fact is the market here is small enough and connected enough that if you run over somebody's toes, everybody knows. And you know what? Like, none of us have time for that. You'll only run over our toes once.
I want to ask you a bit about KingSett. You've grown the most successful private equity real estate firm in the country. What are you most proud of?
So I would say what I'm most proud of, because I just celebrated this in the last few weeks, is the 42nd anniversary with my wife. So if you talk to me about what my priority set would be, that would be number one. 2 great kids who married 2 great spouses, 5 great grandchildren. So that's where I tick the first boxes. As to KingSett, I think what I'm most proud of is the team of people that we've been able to assemble and the kind of work that everybody's doing.
I'm biased, but I agree. Great.
It is a great buzz for me to wander around. People talk about management by wandering around. I actually just observe. It's kind of cool to see what everybody's doing, and it's a lot of high energy young people. There's few old people like me. It's created a sort of a work system, an ecosystem where people say, we can do some stuff here and we can change the world. And at the end of the day, our purpose is all about if we can create value for our broader stakeholder group, which includes coworkers, our community, obviously our investors and others. It's a big calling, and we've been able to do that. And I think that as I look at the team of people I work with, the value set all represents what I believe in, and I'm particularly proud of that.
So I've heard many CEOs sitting in seats similar to yours say that HR and people is the hardest part.
Right.
So how'd you get it right?
Well, you never get it right. You sort of cast from shoal to shoal. But people isn't the hardest part. It's at the end of the day really the only part. Because if you can't get the people right, nothing works. And so I've tried my best to try and get people that are smarter than me, taller than me. Taller is easier, and a variety of different sets like that. And I think that stands there. But it is. I spend a lot of time thinking about, have we got the right people doing the right things, and are they the right alignment and compensation, all those other things. Because I think if you get that right, things work well. I mean, I've often said I'm very good at very little, and so with that acknowledgement, I'm well aware that the whole rest of the pie has to be filled in by people that are better at those things than me. And I would tell you at Oxford, that was the secret there, and for sure at KingSett that's the secret. So it is, the people thing is fundamental. And if you get the people issue wrong, nothing works. Nothing works.
I'm sure a lot of people in this room might be coming up to you and asking about those careers at KingSett. So do you have a favorite interview question, or what do you look for when you sit down with someone?
I like to, typically people I'm talking to, I don't talk about the specific subject matter that they're on, because I won't know, I won't be a subject expert, so again, I know very little about it. But I'm more interested in attitude than aptitude. So, and it's things, questions I will typically ask are something that is, current events, maybe something political. People have a view. Do they feel confident they can express a view? And I don't really care what the view is, but that they have a view, that they know what's going on, and do they understand the implications of things going on around us? So how self-aware, not self-aware, how aware are our people? Well, and what are they? What are their motivations? What drives their thinking? And how do they think about family, business, and things like that? So I'm more interested in who the person is, because I always think you can play the person, and if you've got the right person, they can learn everything. Because again, real estate is not brain surgery, right? And this is all about having the skills with regards to being able to communicate and connect, align, and support those people around you. And if you think someone's got that DNA, they'll fit with us. If someone is a rock star but hogs the puck, then it doesn't work on our ice.
You've had a remarkable career, as Eric said, not built one successful business, but 2. Looking back, is there anything you do differently?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't remember anything. So, you know, the reality is no. The other thing is I always redefine success as it goes, right? So, I mean, I'm the first one to pull up the goalpost and move them to the right if I shot, you know, to the right. But no, I've had a remarkable run, and I would tell you the time in the early '90s where it was particularly difficult was one of my highlights, and I loved it because we, as a team, collected. And faced obstacles. At the time, put in perspective, Oxford was maybe the 10th largest real estate company in Canada, right? So Oxford was sort of a, you know, roadkill. And it was a tremendous opportunity because nothing was expected of us. And when nothing's expected of you, it's hard to disappoint people. So we had a phenomenal connection of that team and that energy. Same time, you know, with KingSett, you start KingSett with an idea and people are kind enough to support it, but you have no idea what you can actually get done. And you know, those are interesting times. But I wouldn't change anything per se, because like any decision you make is neither right nor wrong. It's just had different consequences. And so, you know, one never knows. I don't sort of think in those terms. You know, people sometimes say to me, "What's the biggest mistake you made in your career?" And I said, "Well, maybe I have to make something up because I don't really remember." Even though, you know, the highway's littered with mistakes I made, but it's not what I dwell on. It's not how I think. I always kind of think, "Can I learn from that and move forward?"
So we only have a short time left. What's keeping you up at night these days?
Actually, I sleep pretty well. So. Probably the thing that sort of aggravates me the most would be the political overlay, where I think I'm very stressed about populism generally. I mean, Brexit is a regrettable set of facts. The divisive politics in the U.S., regardless of which side you're on, is a regrettable set of facts. I see some of the same things emerging here, which, you know, I find very disappointing because and I see an east versus west and an urban versus rural and these divides. And, you know, I grew up in Edmonton. I've got dear friends there. I've got just regular friends elsewhere. But, you know, so it's just, I think it's a sad set of facts that we find ourselves in a world where it's partially social media, it's partially, the wealth gap and so on. I mean, there's a number of reasons, but we find ourselves at each other's throat, which just really is unfortunate. I just want to leave, I know, we have no time, it doesn't matter. I just want to leave you with one thought. So people often talk about the wealth gap, you know, rich versus poor and the gap and so on and so forth. And here's just a nugget for you. If you don't look at this wealth gap, but you look at income mobility, in other words, what are the odds, and they measure income in quintiles, 5, what's the odd that you move out of the 5th quintile into the 4th, 3rd, 2nd? You find in Canada, and these are studies that have been done over a long period of time, you can Google them and look at this, that basically the number is that 80% in their lifetime in Canada will move from out of the 5th quintile up. 60 will move 2, 40 will move 3, and 20 will move to the top quintile. That is, interestingly enough, double the mobility in the US or the UK. Why? And nobody speculates on why, but my speculation on why is because we have a healthcare system and an education system which is available fundamentally to everybody. And so it's actually a great underpinning, and I just wish our political discourse could settle down and focus on some of our phenomenal strengths of diversity. We have diversity, but not enough inclusion. We have a wealth gap, but we've got great income mobility. We've got so much going for us, and hopefully we can move forward in a positive way.
Well, thank you for ending on a positive note, and thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your time.